y'all! I know it's not spooky season anymore, but we did do a scary storytelling stream back in October, and I wanted to share some of my favorite stories from that, and so these are some of my favorite clips and stories that we told that day. Alright, this one's called My Neighbors Say They've Known My Son for Years. I've Never Had Children. This is, I think, the first story on the page. Alright. You ready, chat? Should I move my mic closer? You want this to be ASMR? Oh, sorry, I just dragged that across my desk. That was a not smart move. Is that better? I know, you do watch all my streams. You do watch all my streams. Okay, you ready? How old must he be now? 8? 9? I stared at my neighbor, unsure what she was asking. She read the confusion on my face. You're a cute little guy. I saw him biking down the lane earlier. He must be old enough for grade 4 now, right? Mrs. Babbage was a bit on the older side, but I never thought she had shown signs of dementia. Not until now. I wasn't exactly sure what to say. She proceeded to stare at me, tilting her head, as if I was the one misremembering. I awkwardly opened my mouth. Oh, right. My little guy. She brightened. Yeah, he must be in grade 4, right? Sure, yes, he is. What a cute little guy, she said, and returned to watering her flowers. It was an odd, slightly sad moment. I wondered if her husband had seen glimmers of this too. I could only hope that this was a momentary blip and not the sign of anything Alzheimer's related. I took the rest of my groceries out of my car and entered home. I had had a long day of teaching, and I just wanted to sit back, unwind, and watch something light on TV. But as soon as I took off my first shoe, I smelled it. Something burning on the stove. Something burning with lots of cheese on it. I dashed over to the kitchen and almost fell down, partially because I was wearing only one shoe, but also because there was a scrawny little boy frying Kraft dinner. I let out a half scream, but very quickly I composed myself into the same assertive adult who taught at a university. What? Excuse me. Who are you? What are you doing here? The boy's blonde, willow-like hair whipped around his face as he looked at me with equal surprise. Papa, what do you mean? I'm here. He was a scared, confused child, and I couldn't quite place the bizarre inflection of his words. Do you want some, Papa? Here, have some. Was that a Russian accent? It took me a second to realize he was wearing an oversized shirt that looked just like mine. Was he wearing my clothes? I held out my palms like I would at a lecture, my standard everyone settle down gesture, and cleared my throat. I'm sorry, I don't know who you are, or what this is. The boy widened his eyes, still frightened by my intensity. He stirred the food with a wooden spoon. It's dinner, Papa, your favorite, chili cheese kind. Don't you remember? His name was Dmitri, and he claimed to be my son. Apparently, at some point, there had been a mother, but he didn't remember much about her. He only remembered me. You've been Papa my whole life. I tried having a sit-down conversation. In fact, I tried to have many sit-down conversations where I explained to Dmitri that that would be impossible. But it always ended with him clutching me with impassioned tears, begging me to remember him. The confusion only got worse when my mother called. How's my grandson doing? She asked. I didn't know how to reply. The conversation grew awkward and tense until eventually I clarified my whole predicament. Mom, what are you talking about? I don't have a son. I've never had a son. My mother gasped a little, then laughed and scolded me, saying I shouldn't joke around like that, because of course I've always had a son. A smart little guy who will be celebrating 9 this weekend. I hung up. I stood, petrified in my own kitchen, staring at this strange, expectant child. For the next 10 minutes, all I could do was ask where his parents were, and he just continued to act frightened, like any authentic kid might, and replied with the same question. How did you forget me? My method wasn't getting me anywhere, so I decided to play along. I cleared my head with a shot of espresso. I told him my brain must have been scrambled from overworking, and I apologized for not remembering I was his father. He brightened immediately. It's okay, he gave me a hug. You always work so hard. The tension dropped further as Dmitri finished making the noodles and served himself some. I politely declined and watched him eat. And he watched me watch him eat. So you're okay now? You're not angry? No, I said. I'm not angry. I was just a little scrambled. His eyes shimmered, looking more expectant. So we can be normal now? Oh, sorry. That word does not make sense to me. A chill trickled down my neck. I didn't really know what to say, but for whatever reason, I did not want to say, yes, we can be normal now, because this was not normal. Far from it. This child was not my son. He started playing with his food and quivered a little, like a worried mouse seeking reassurance. Everything will be fine, I eventually said. No need to stress. Enjoy your noodles. To my shock and dismay, I discovered that Dmitri also had his own room. My home office had somehow been replaced by a barren, clay-walled chamber filled with linen curtains, old wooden toys, and a simple bed. The smell of bread and earth wafted throughout. I watched him play with his blocks and spinning tops for about half an hour before he started to yawn and say he wanted to go to sleep. It was the strangest thing, tucking him in. He didn't want to switch to pajamas or anything. He just sort of hopped into his bed and asked me to hold his hand. Dimitri's fingers were cold, slightly clammy. It was very bizarre, comforting him like my own son, but it appeared to work. He softened and lay still. He didn't ask for any lullaby or bedtime story, just wanted to hold my hand for a minute. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here. So glad you can be my papa. Good night. I inched my way out of the room and watched him through the crack in the door. At about 9:30, he gave small, childlike snores. He had fallen asleep. Cautiously, I called Pat, my coworker with whom I shared close contact. She had the same reaction of my mother. Harlan, of course you have a son. From your marriage to Svetlana. My marriage to who? You met her in Moscow, when you were touring Europe. It was true that I had guest lectured 15 years ago across the UK, Germany, and Russia. I was awarded a grant for it, but I only stayed in Moscow for 3 days. I never met anyone named that. Don't be weird. Come on. Pat's conviction was very disturbing. You and her were together for many years. We were? How many? Look, I know the divorce was hard, but you shouldn't pretend your ex-wife doesn't exist. I'm not pretending. I'm being serious. I don't remember her. Then get some sleep. I sipped on my second espresso of the night. But I have slept. I'm fine. Well, then I don't get what this joke is. Knock it off. It's creepy. I'm not joking. I'll see you tomorrow for the birthday. Birthday? Yes, your son's birthday. Good night, Harlan. Get some sleep. I didn't sleep that night. My efforts were spent scouring the filing cabinets and drawers throughout my house. I had credit card bills covering school supplies, kids' clothing shops, and costlier groceries. I even had pictures of Dmitri hung around the walls from various ages. It's like something was conforming to this new reality. The harder I looked for clues to disprove my fatherhood, the more evidence I found confirming it. It was Dmitri who woke me up off the living room couch and said Uncle Boris was here. Uncle Boris? I peeked through the window and could see a very large, blond man smiling back at me. Behind him was a gaggle of other relatives all speaking Russian to each other. Hello! The blond man's voice penetrated past the glass. We are here for the birthday! They all looked excited and motioned to the front door. They were all wearing tunics and leggings. Traditional birthday clothes or something? I was completely floored. I didn't know what to do, so I just sort of nodded and subtly slinked back to my kitchen. Dmitri came to pull at my arm. Come on, Papa, we have to let them in. I don't know any of them. Yes, you do, Papa. It's Uncle Boris. I yanked my hand away. It was one thing to pretend I was this kid's dad for a night. It was quite another to let a group of strangers into my house first thing in the morning. Dmitri frowned. I'll open the door. Wait, hold on. I grabbed Dimitri's shoulder. He turned away. Let go! I tried to pull him back, but then he dragged me into his living room again. Our struggle was on display for everyone outside. Boris looked at me with saucer eyes. Dmitri pulled harder, and I had no choice but to pull harder back. The boy hit his head on the table as he fell. Boris yelled something in Russian. Someone else hollered back. I heard hands trying to wrench open my door. Dmitri, stop, I said. Let's just take a minute to... You're hurting me! My front door unlocked. Footsteps barreled inside. I let go of my son and watched 3 large men enter my house with stern expressions. Dmitri hid behind them. Is everything okay? Boris peered down at me through his tangle of blonde hair. Yes, sorry, I said, struggling to find words. I'm just very... confused. Confused? Why were you hitting Dmitri? The little boy pulled on his uncle's arm and whispered something into his ear. Boris's expression furrowed, but before I could speak further, a slender pair of arms pushed aside all the male figures and revealed a woman with unwavering, bloodshot eyes. Something in me knew it was her. She wore a draped brown sheet as a dress with skin so pale I could practically see her sinews and bones. It's like she had some extreme form of albinism. Harlan, she said, somehow breaking my name into 3 syllables. I've never been so instinctively afraid of a person in my life. It's like she had weaved herself out of the darkest edges of my memory. I saw flashes of her holding my waist in Moscow outside Red Square, flashes of her lips whispering chants in the shadows of St. Basil's Cathedral. Svetlana held Dmitri's shoulder, then looked up at me. Just tell him it will be normal. Tell him everything will be normal. No, this is not happening. None of this is real. Barefoot and still wearing the same clothes as yesterday, I bolted out the back of my house and hurtled towards my driveway. Before the rest of my new family could realize what was going on, I hopped into my Subaru and stepped on the gas. As I drove away from my house, I looked back into my rearview mirror, and I swear, it didn't look like my house at all. I swear it looked like a thatched roof hut. Back at the university, I walled myself up in my study. I canceled all speaking arrangements for the next week, saying I needed a few personal days. No one in my department knew I had a son. Nothing in my study indicated I had extended Russian family. When I asked Pat about our phone conversation last night, her response was, "What conversation?" My mom said the same thing. With immense trepidation, I returned to my house the following day, and after setting foot back inside, I knew that everything had reverted back to the way it was before. No more famed pictures of Dmitri, no more alarming photo albums. In that clay-walled room where Dmitri spun tops and slept inside, it was just my home office again. To this day, I still have no clue what happened during that bizarre September weekend, but doing some of my own research, I'm starting to think I did encounter something in Moscow all those years ago. Some kind of lingering old curse, or a stray spirit, or a black witch disguised as an ordinary woman. Although I haven't seen any evil things bubble up around my place since, every now and then I do have a conversation with Mrs. Babbage, and she seems to remember my son very well. Such a cute little guy, always waving hello. Did you know he offered me food once? I think it was Kraft dinner. That's the end of that one. That one was a little weird. That one was a little weird. Don't fuck Russian gods while on work trips. Literally, don't fuck Russian gods while on work trips. Yeah, that was interesting. So, I haven't read any of these. I haven't read any of these. So I'm reading these with you guys, basically. With you. So this one is a thread of what's the most unexplained experience you've ever had. Here's one of mine. I've been in law enforcement for over 16 years here in Texas and have seen more than my fair share of tragic, creepy, and downright unexplainable things on the job. From murder scenes to suicides to fatality accidents, sometimes a place just feels different. I've posted here before about a burglary in progress call I responded to, but there's another encounter that still sticks with me. I may have shared it before, but I figure it's worth repeating for everyone. There was one call I went to, a death notification that really freaked me out. I had to contact some family members of a deceased woman that was involved in a fatal car accident a few miles away from her home. When I arrived, I met a woman near the roadway just inside the property gate. She said she heard me coming from miles away. I asked her if she lived at the residence, which she confirmed she did. After asking her to speak with me at the house, she agreed but said she needed to walk as the house was about 75 yards from the road. After making it to the house, I approached the front door on a small wooden porch and began scanning the driveway for the woman. It was about 1 a.m. and completely dark. While looking for the woman, the front door opened and a younger woman appeared. She was concerned about my presence and asked if everything was okay. I asked if I could speak with her and any other adults inside, and she welcomed me in. I told her I would wait for the woman I met near the gate, and she told me nobody else should be home. I then freaked out and began searching the property. Nothing. After entering the residence, I told her and her husband the news about Susan, which ended up being her mother. She said her mother had moved in a few months back, and her father had passed and she wasn't handling it well. While she and her husband were comforting one another, I began looking at photos on the wall. There was this picture of a mid-aged woman that stuck out to me. She was a younger version of the woman I spoke with near the gate. While looking at the picture, the daughter confirmed that her mother was the woman that passed in the wreck. I spoke with the ghost of the individual that died in the crash just before telling her family what happened. This experience and many others prompted me to start sharing stories like these from my job. That's really interesting. I don't know if I like that. I don't think I like that. I don't like it. I don't like it. Okay, I'm trying to find... I'm trying to find... Okay, we're gonna read this one. Well, I think this next one, I don't believe is fake either. And I'm gonna do my best because it is originating from Mexico. Oh. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, they feel more real. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Okay, this one's called Stories from My Childhood. You guys know how everyone has that one story? The one that's really local, creepy, and everyone swears it's true. Well, in our town in Mexico, the story belongs to my grandpa Octavio. He was one of the guys it happened to. My grandpa and his band were the best musicians in the town back in the day, always booked for birthdays and serenades. One evening, they'd just finished up a gig and were packing up their instruments when this guy just appeared out of the deepest shadow. Seriously, my grandpa said it was like he was just there, like a bad magic trick. He was dressed head to toe in a suit. It was more than just black, it was a color that seemed to swallow the light. He had this really severe, thin face, and his eyes were just still, unblinking, and really focused on them. He offers them a job, a private party, and the money he mentions is absolutely ridiculous. It was a massive payday, so of course they said yes. The only catch? They had to meet him the next night at 11 p.m., and they all had to wear complete black. Everything. Super strange, but the money talked, right? The next night, my grandfather and his band are there early, all in their darkest suits. When the cathedral clock started chiming those 11 deep tolls, the black suit guy just materialized right on the corner again. It gave them all a huge jolt. He didn't say anything, just waved a hand for them to follow. They walked for ages through streets my grandpa swore they'd never seen, until they hit this spot where there was suddenly this huge old mansion. It was silent, completely dark, and just radiated this incredibly heavy, dead feeling. The guy led them inside, dropped a huge bag of coins on a table, paying them up front, which was weird, and told them to wait while he went through the giant double doors. My grandpa said he felt this cold, crushing sense of dread just sitting there. Then, this tiny, wizened old guy pops out and whispers, "The music needs to start. Play the first waltz." So they start playing. The doors swing open, and the dancers start gliding out. They were all wearing these fancy, out-of-style clothes, and they were all really pale. The first thing my grandpa noticed that made his stomach drop was that the couples weren't touching the floor. They were floating, hovering maybe an inch above the wood. He looked closer, and that's when the real panic hit. Their feet, underneath the elegant shoes, weren't feet at all. They were dark, polished, cloven hooves, like a goat, or something much worse. But the worst part? Their eyes. Every single person in the ballroom had eyes that were actively glowing crimson. It wasn't just red, it was a deep, terrible color, like tiny contained fires burning right behind their pupils. They were dancing with the dead, maybe worse. Then, Ramon, the guitarist, starts freaking out. He stares at a woman in an old-fashioned dress and whispers, "Octavio, I know her. That's Maria, Juan's sister. She died years ago, remember?" She had been dancing around with the rope she had used to unalive herself. She then noticed the band, and she floated right up to the bandstand. Her voice was just this cold, chilling whisper. "Why are you playing for them? Run! You don't know where you are? Do you not realize you are in hell?" That was it. That was the ticket out. They didn't grab the instruments. They didn't look for the money. They just dropped everything and ran like they'd been shot out of a cannon. When the sun finally came up, they found themselves completely exhausted, collapsed on that same street corner. The mansion? Gone. Just the empty, overgrown lot that's still there today. My grandpa was messed up about this for a long time. He could never bring himself to play his violin again. That's why the local bands here are superstitious. You simply don't take a gig from a stranger late at night, because you don't want to play for the devil himself. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Some of these are really good. I will say, I really liked that one. We're gonna read A Windy Night. This is supposedly a true ghost story. This one says, "The night of April 24th found me suffering from a slight cold. Though my husband's now retired and no longer has to get up early, he's still an insomniac, so to spare him from my sneezing, coughing self, I headed downstairs to the couch to read on my phone. After falling into a brief doze, I found myself awake again at 1:45 a.m. for no particular reason. So I started another chapter of the Hollywood biography I'd downloaded. Quickly engrossed in the story, I was startled when something that sounded like a mini tornado suddenly erupted in the foyer. The whirring, churning sound had no explanation, for the weather outside was calm, but even if it hadn't been, the well-insulated front door and windows would have prevented any air leakage. At first, the tornado seemed confined to the 8x8 area, which opens into A, the stairs rising to the second floor, B, the swing door that leads to the butler's pantry and kitchen, and C, the archway of the living room. Being in the living room, I looked, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The usual assortment of papers piled on the foyer table were undisturbed. Now, a little spooked, I laid my phone down, listening as the wind banged through the solid oak swing door, whooshed through the pantry, and hit the antique kitchen table with a thwack. It then crossed over to the east side of the room and smacked one of the upper cabinets so hard I could hear the rattle in the other room. After that, there was a short series of odd clicks and pops, followed by the sound of something stomping toward the back door. In 30 years in this house, I'd never heard anything like this before. Not even in 2021, when grazed by the edge of a tornado, I heard the wind scream around the eaves like a banshee. Frankly, those sounds were scarier, especially, for some reason, the clicks and pops which seemed almost like an attempt at speech. Though I tried to rationalize and return to my reading, I couldn't concentrate, so finally, I decided to join my husband upstairs. Since he seemed to be sleeping peacefully, I assumed he hadn't heard anything, so I just got in the bed and eventually joined him in slumber. In the morning, my cold was mostly gone, and while I remembered the events of the night before, I thought maybe my mind had somehow exaggerated them. That is, until my husband asked, "What the heck was going on downstairs last night? I heard you stomping around the kitchen, banging the cabinets. Did you have a snack attack?" And there's a follow-up to this one. Alright, this says, at the time the above incident took place, unbeknownst to me, my late cousin's husband, Rick, a retired school principal, was in the hospital as the result of a bad fall at his house. His only daughter, Anita, who lives in the southwestern U.S., 1,700 miles away, was too busy trying to coordinate his care long distance to notify extended family of the situation until a day or two later. At first, the news about Rick seemed optimistic. Doctors said that despite the bruising he'd suffered, plus a couple of broken teeth, he had no internal injuries or broken bones. After a brief stay in an intermediate care facility, he'd be able to return home with some nursing assistance. Unfortunately, during the transfer from the hospital to the care facility, one of his medications didn't follow him, and without it, a health condition normally well controlled began to get out of hand. After discovering the oversight, instead of providing him with what he needed, the two institutions began dithering over which of them was responsible for writing a new prescription. Why his doctor wouldn't do this, I don't know, but Rick's daughter is a pharmacist, but her pleas for either institution to please just give her father a few pills to tide him over were ignored. While this was going on, Rick developed a systemic infection, supposedly from one of the broken teeth, which led to kidney failure, and sadly, death. When Anita called to tell me her dad had passed, we had a long conversation during which she disclosed he'd been in a desperate mental state in his final days. Cogent, but unable to get his caregivers to give him what he needed, he became very, very agitated. This was unusual for a man normally unflappable, which made me think he knew what the end result would be if he didn't get his meds. Fighting for his life and aware his daughter wasn't having much success in her tangles with the hospital and care facility staff, I now wonder if Rick's spirit somehow left his body and tried to reach out to my husband and me in the form of the mysterious tornado we'd heard. One reason I believe it might have been him was the heavy tread we heard in the kitchen, for my cousin-in-law was a large person whose gait had become more of a stump as he developed knee problem in later years. Another is that I seem to have a particularly close psychic connection with that branch of my family, since Rick's mother-in-law, my father's sister, also came to visit us at the time of her passing in 1998. Needless to say, Rick's family, friends, and former colleagues are heartbroken over what we perceive as his unnecessary death. We hope his spirit has somehow been able to find peace. That's so sad. This one's called Brother Haunted Us. My brother died when he was 12, accidental drowning. He started haunting the family a few months later. First weird happening was attributed to him involved a figurine music box. He had picked out the music box for our mom's Mother's Day gift that year. It's a wind-up box with an on-off switch. One evening, everyone is seated at the dining table. We are about halfway through dinner. Music starts playing from the other room. Everyone looks around the table. No one has left since the start of the meal. Dad gets up. We all follow. He stops in front of the china cabinet. The cabinet doors are closed. The music box is behind the glass, rotating around, playing a tune. Dad opens the cabinet door. The music stops. He picks up the figurine and turns it over. The switch is in the off position. He places it back on the shelf, closes the cabinet, and we all follow him back to the dining table to finish our meal in absolute silence. As Dad sits back after dinner with a cup of coffee and a roll-your-own cigarette, he says, "Billy was always a bit of a practical joker, wasn't he?" I inherited that music box when my mom passed away a few years ago. It sits quietly on my shelf. Insane Ouija board experience from Grandma. When I was younger, I had asked my grandma if she ever had any experiences with a Ouija board, and she actually did. She had 8 siblings, and her baby sister at the time would cry and cry non-stop if she didn't have her pacifier. This time, the pacifier was lost, and the baby sister wouldn't stop crying and screaming. It was stressing out the entire family as they searched and searched for the pacifier. Everyone was looking, tearing the house apart, looking for the pacifier to stop the baby from the non-stop screaming. Trust me, no one wants to hear a baby crying uncontrollably, even young kids, so I don't think anyone hid it on purpose or made the story up. My grandma and her siblings got so desperate to find the pacifier that they turned to asking the Ouija board. Some of her and the siblings got together right away to ask the board where the pacifier was, and it responded with, "Behind Mom's bed." They instantly went to go check, and there it was, behind the headboard of the bed. It freaked out everyone, and the story still sticks with me till this day. Okay, my parents' 25-year-old ghost story. This is my parents' story. Everyone who was involved in the experience still talks about it to this day because of how bad it scared them. I've always been fascinated by it, so I wanted to share it on Reddit. Right after my parents got married, they decided to find a small place together to start their new life with each other. They found a cheap 2-bed, 1-bath house close to my dad's job. They weren't picky since it was meant to be temporary until my mom finished nursing school and they could save enough to buy a home. They moved in shortly after finding it, got settled, and for the first month, everything was completely normal. That was until my dad's grandmother gave them a little clown figure she'd found at a yard sale. It was one of those vintage wind-up ones that spins in a circle and plays a creepy old children's song. My mom has always hated clowns and thought it was unsettling, but she didn't want to be rude, so she put it up on a shelf in their kitchen and tried to ignore it. Not even a week later, she started noticing it would randomly spin and sing by itself. Sometimes it would start up when she walked past it, when she was home alone and in the middle of the night for no reason at all. It kept happening until she finally decided to throw it out. She tossed it into the trash and figured that was the end of it. A few days later, after the garbage had already been picked up, she walked into the kitchen and found the clown sitting right back on the same shelf. My mom was freaked out and showed her mother-in-law. The second she picked it up, the clown's head started spinning rapidly while the rest of it stayed still. My dad's mom, who's very religious, immediately started praying over it, then drove it straight to the dump herself. They never saw it again, but after that, everything in the house just seemed to get worse. One day, my mom was in the driveway unloading groceries when she saw a tall man in a black hat standing about 10 feet away from her by a tree, staring directly at her. She tried to not make eye contact and started walking up the driveway. He first began walking toward her, but then sped up. My mom luckily made it to the front door in time and locked it. She told my dad, but he brushed it off and said it was probably some random creep, and they most likely wouldn't come back. A while later, her niece and nephew came to stay for the night while my dad was out fishing. In the middle of the night, they ran into her room, crying, saying a tall man with a black hat had been standing over them. It kept happening every time they stood over until they eventually refused to come back. A while after that happened, my dad was out fishing again when my mom heard a loud crashing sound coming from their spare room. It was a room with a pool table, a desk, and a couple of chairs. It sounded like all of the furniture was being violently thrown against the walls over and over. She freaked out, thinking someone had broken in, and immediately called her mom, who told her to leave the house and call my dad. My dad came home, and when they went inside, the room was completely untouched. Everything was exactly where it had been. After this, my mom refused to even step foot in the house if she was going to be home alone. Anytime my dad was gone, she went to her mom's house until he got back. But even that didn't stop whatever was going on. Not long after, an old, disheveled woman started showing up in their yard at night. She'd stand under the large oak tree in front of their house, mumbling to herself for hours. She did this several times a week. Around the 10th time, my dad finally had enough. He went outside and yelled at her to get off their property. She slowly looked up and whispered, "You can't take us all," whatever that meant. He told her to leave or he'd call the cops. She turned around and walked away. They were both extremely spooked by this, but she never came back, so they forgot about it. A month or two went by, and they noticed that their electric bill had been very high for the past few months. My parents were very cautious with their energy use because they didn't make a lot and were trying to save up, so they were very confused. They contacted one of the owners of the house to come check for electrical issues. The house had belonged to two brothers who inherited it after their father died there. My mom didn't want to be alone when one of them was scheduled to come by, so she asked her mom to stay with her that day. Her mom knew everything that had been happening and decided to hang crosses on almost every wall in the house, including one above the front door. When the guy showed up, he literally stepped 1 foot across the threshold and immediately jerked his foot back and said he was actually going to call someone else to deal with it. Later, they found out through a neighbor that the brother's father was a tall, mean man who always wore a black hat. I guess he didn't want anyone living in this house. Anyway, by this point, my parents were trying to leave as fast as they could. My dad picked up 2 extra jobs just to get them out faster. They saved up every last dollar until they finally had enough to leave. Once they moved, everything stopped. Whatever was tormenting them left them alone. About a year later, they were living a normal life in a new house right across from my dad's parents. One night, they were driving home from dinner and decided to take a shortcut. Out of nowhere, their car broke down in the middle of the road. When they got out, they realized they were broke down right in front of their old house. My dad immediately jump-started the car and got the hell out of there. That was about 25 years ago. Nobody in my family has had any strange experiences since then. The old house isn't listed anymore, and I have no idea if anyone lives there or if it's just abandoned. I've never gone near it and don't ever plan to. I think this is one that I've read before. This is a pretty good one. This one's called The Woman in the Gap. When I was a child in Japan, I heard a story that kept me awake for nights. It wasn't told like a ghost tale or a legend, it was told as something that really happened to a student. The story went like this. A college student suddenly stopped showing up to class. His friends grew worried and decided to check on him at his apartment. When he finally answered the door, they were shocked. He looked pale, thin, and drained of all energy. Inside, the curtains were drawn tight, the room a mess, and the air heavy. One of the friends tried to lighten the mood, telling him to open the curtains, but the student shook his head. "I can't," he whispered. "I was told not to." When they asked who told him, he didn't answer. He just pointed toward the wall, the narrow gap between a bookcase and a wardrobe. The friends thought he was losing his mind, until they looked. In that 5-centimeter sliver of darkness, a woman was standing, perfectly still. Her wide, unblinking eyes stared straight at them. The friends gasped and turned back, but the gap was empty. The student lowered his head and muttered just one line. "She's always there." I'll never forget the chill I felt when I first heard this story. Yeah, I don't know if I saw something in the gap in my room, I don't think I'd ever sleep. I don't think I'd ever sleep ever again. This one doesn't have a title, but this one is labeled as a real ghost story. Always believed my old childhood home was haunted, as me, my mom, my dad, my sister, and my aunt all had experiences there. Those are just the ones I explicitly know of. There's likely more people who have experienced things. My grandfather worked his ass off to build the home and get everything set up, and we were inclined to believe he kept watch over us regularly after his tragically early passing. None of his grandchildren ever got the chance to meet him. However, according to my mom, I had seen him sitting on his old wooden stereo that spanned the length of our dining room wall when I was a toddler. I don't remember that experience because of how young I was. I asked her, "Who is that man here?" And she responded with, "What man?" And I walked over to him, acted as if I was patting his leg, and said, "It's okay. I see you." If I recall correctly, I think I even pointed him out in a picture as the person I saw. There were several other, mostly minor instances that weren't too difficult to rationalize that occurred to all of us, but I'll share the spookiest thing that happened to me during my middle school years. One night, I kept hearing creaks, cracks, and knocks near my bedroom door and in the hallway just beyond it. My bed was positioned where I couldn't see directly into the hallway, and my door had to remain open to supply heat to the rest of the house, as the vent in my room worked better than any of the others. These noises occasionally happened for small stretches some nights, and I don't know exactly how to describe their frequency, but I will say that they always seemed deliberate and relatively intelligent, like whatever was making the noises was acutely aware of if I was paying attention to it or not. The noises would usually die down when I actively listened to or looked for them, and if I outright ignored them, they'd usually stop after a bit or I'd just fall asleep in spite of them, which was admittedly rare because this spooked me a lot. This particular night, however, they were a bit more aggressive. almost like there was a certain excitement to them. They continued for a few hours in the middle of the night while everyone else was asleep. I'd say roughly from 10 or 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. is when this took place. I could not sleep at all, and every time I started to drift off, the noises became much heavier, so I figured I'd read a book to make me as sleepy as possible. I grabbed a Bible and read the most boring passages I could find. I was to the point where I was drifting off with the overhead light on me and on my side with my head popped up in my hand, like I was trying to do some sort of pose or something. And every single time I began to doze, I'd be woken up by these noises. I'd finally had enough and decided I'd sleep in my mom's room if she'd let me. It always felt like her room was afforded a certain sense of privacy, further lending to our theory of it being my grandfather. This is where things went from, I can maybe rationalize this, to this is freaking insane. Curses stack where blessings don't. Oh no, that's true. It's so true. I closed the book, set it on my nightstand, got up, and began walking to the door when I started hearing crinkling behind me. Us kids had ruined a mattress or two in the past by spilling stuff on them, so the plastic wrapping was left on our current ones for easier cleanup and to avoid having to buy new ones in such cases. Now sometimes there would absolutely be a little crinkling heard after getting up off it. Sorry, it took me a minute to read that word. Crinkling heard after getting up off it, but this time it was quite a bit louder and lasted longer. I got to my door, realized it was still crinkling, and my curiosity got the best of me. I turned around, and I could see the material moving on the side of the mattress. There was an impression in it moving from the lower end up towards the headboard like someone was brushing up against it and walking by. I immediately noped the hell out of there, and as I was speed walking, I didn't run because I didn't want to wake everyone else up, down the hallway I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I got to my mom's room at the other end of the house, woke her up, and asked, "Can I sleep in here tonight?" She asked, "What's wrong?" and I stammered, saying, "I don't know. There's something out there." She said, "Well, do you have your pillow? You're not taking mine." I didn't, so I went back to go get one of mine. When I approached the hallway, the footsteps started up again, directly behind me this time. Again, curiosity got to me. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, but part of me was also hoping with every fiber of my being that I could find a rational explanation. I stopped halfway down the hallway and listened, thinking maybe it's just the echo of my own footsteps or something, even though I'd never once heard an echo in the house. As soon as I stopped, I heard another 2 steps behind me that sounded like it was getting closer to me. I stayed still for a split second, but when I realized that the second step I heard after I stopped was maybe a foot away from me and the first one was farther away, meaning I was being followed, I stopped worrying about not waking anyone else up. I sprinted to my bed, snatched a pillow up, and sprinted back to my mom's room, hearing extra footsteps in the hallway, no longer following me, up until I got close to her door. I fell asleep probably close to half an hour later, and the next day I tried to just let it go. Not necessarily forget about it, but just let it not get to me. After all, I never explicitly felt threatened by a presence in the house, been spooked a few times, but that was the closest it ever felt like it was specifically messing with me. I didn't realize until after getting back home from school the next afternoon and hearing my mom on the phone that it was my grandma's birthday. Something that I learned years later as an adult and living in a different house was that my grandfather always loved celebrating and making a big deal out of grandma's birthday. Maybe he was just celebrating that particular night, or in his own way preparing for her birthday the next day, but certain things began to make a lot of sense in hindsight, at least as much as they can for something paranormal, as around that time of year was when I would tend to have more of my unexplained experiences.